All right, hello again, Ling 441. We are once again back in the minivan for today's episode of TOBI Lab exercise number 4. And so the way I'm going to do this one is I'm going to split up the video into two parts. As you might recall, the exercise set was split into two halves as well. There's 4 in each, 4 text grids that you have to work on in each half of this. So 8 would be a bit too many for one video, I think, so I'm going to try to keep it simple and just work through this in stages. So I've once again gotten random text grids from those of you who sent in your transcriptions to us all, and we'll take a look at them in turn. So we've got this first candidate.
That's really illuminating.
We've got 2 Illuminatings and 2 Marianas in this exercise. So the first one is about how something
That's really illuminating.
is really illuminating. And so I like a lot of what I see here. Number one, we got the word breaks where they ought to be.
That's
That's
really illuminating.
and illuminating. Yeah, so this is a 1 here, this is a 1 here, and this is a 4 here at the tail end. The 4 lines up very nicely with the end of the last word, and also the boundary tone combo here, which is an L-L %. I think that's relatively uncontroversial. You can kind of hear the speaker's pitch contour go down to the bottom end of her range there at the very end.
That's really illuminating. That's really illuminating.
It gets a little fuzzy here at the tail end, so it may not look like it's going down as much as it actually is. But basically, she's hitting the bottom end of her F0 range. Now that I listen to it, it's fuzzy a little bit because I think she's doing a little bit of breathy voice at the tail end there. And other cases, we've seen creaky voice at the end of an utterance.
That's really illuminating.
We see creaky voice here more for this speaker. But this is more breathy, or at least it's noisy in some fashion. Anyways, that's kind of beside the point because this is an LL at the tail end. The kind of only controversial stuff here might be in the other pitch accents that are transcribed in the middle of this intonational phrase. So we've got an H star here for that. And I agree with that as well. This one is obviously high. Her F0 is way up here at 340 hertz, which is nice and high for her pitch range, and it sounds high too, right? It's in fact so high it's really jumping out as prominently accented syllable in this particular utterance. And you might be tempted to put a low plus high star on it because it is so kind of accented, but we don't really have any sort of rise happening before it to make it sound or look like a bitonal pitch accent. We just start off at the high end of the range, and that's it. So that's just a high star.
That's really illuminating. That's really illuminating.
So what else is happening here? This person has got a L star plus high transcribed here for illuminating.
Illuminating.
And so first things first, they've got this pitch accent on the first syllable of illuminating, which is not really the stressed syllable of illuminating. So remember that these pitch accents have to align with where that stress is occurring. And when we move it over here to the second syllable, which is the stress syllable in illuminating, then we see a little bit better what's going on with this pitch accent, because we're going from a spot where it's more, the pitch contour is more on the low end of the speaker's range to a spot where it's more at the high end of her range. So, and we can kind of see this nice sharp rise too going into that. So this is not a low star plus high, but a low plus high star.
That's really illuminating.
And you can see as well that the F0 contour has not really descended at all from this initial high star, so it's not downstepped at all. Remember, I said that downstepping is an optional process. It happens quite often, but it doesn't have to.
That's really illuminating.
And it doesn't happen here, right? So we've got L plus high star on illuminating. In the transcriptions I sent you in my feedback, I put a low star on really as well.
That's really illuminating.
And maybe you hear that, maybe you don't. I might put it on here with a question mark in case you want to see another example of that. It's a question of whether you hear the pitch contour just kind of going down and bouncing off the sort of floor, the F0 floor for this speaker.
That's really illuminating.
And that would make really sound a little more prominent than it would otherwise.
Really? That's really illuminating. That's really illuminating.
Yeah, maybe it's there, maybe it's not. I'm going to keep it in for now. Either way, it's going to be on that first stressed syllable of really. Hopefully you can still see my face here. Really? Same thing for really and illuminating. The pitch accents go on the stressed syllables. So you want to look at those syllables for clues as to what kind of pitch accent is there. That's a low, and this is a low plus high star. And for the bitonal pitch accents, remember, you got to kind of take it in context. What sort of rise is leading into it? What is the timing of the pitch rise that you see?
That's really illuminating.
And hopefully that's illuminating enough for that particular token. And we'll move on to illuminating version number 3. And what do we see here?
That's really illuminating.
Okay, so little kind of paperwork here to take care of. We want to have a word boundary at the end of illuminating like we had before. And this person has a low boundary tone here. That should line up with the 4 break at the tail end of the utterance as well. And also, we know now that anytime you have a boundary tone, you need to have a intermediate phrase accent before it. So I'm okay with this low boundary tone, but the question is what phrase accent should appear before it.
That's really illuminating. That's really illuminating.
And hopefully you can hear it sounds pretty much like what we heard before. She's going to the bottom end of her pitch range here. Maybe there's a bit of breathiness there at the tail end, but it just like the F0 descends and it doesn't go anywhere from there, right? Right after this last pitch accent on illuminating.
Illuminating.
And what that means is that we have a low combo here at the tail end.
That's really illuminating.
Yeah, so the other question is, one thing I'll say here, this person has a 0 break between that's and really. And I'll put a little, whoops, don't want that one. I'll put a little word boundary break before the beginning of that's right in here, just to kind of like cordon that off a little bit. So here's our that's. Here's our really.
Really.
And the only way we'd have a 0 before that's and really is if somehow like the S, the Z, I guess if it's a voiceless S at the end of that's, would change into maybe something voiced, maybe something more like post-alveolar due to the influence of the R at the beginning of really.
Really. Really.
And this is not a high-quality recording by any means. So, we can hear the at the beginning of really. I don't think it's changed, but it's, again,
Really?
This is not the best way to do phonetic transcription. And here's the fricative at the end of that's. And I guess if you hear that as like that's really illuminating, something like that is possible, you would transcribe this as a 0. I hear it just as a regular kind of S.
That's really illuminating.
So we'll leave it as a 1. But that's what you're listening for in that case, is that sort of like co-articulatory influence across word boundaries on individual segments at the word edges. Other than that, we have these 2 pitch accents on really and illuminating.
That's really illuminating.
And again, these are going to go on the stressed syllables of both words, which in really's case is the first syllable. And I think you can see here that we've got a rise through that syllable. So yeah, we do have this kind of nice steep pitch accent pattern. But what we want to see for an L star plus high is that it would still be low, a low pitch contour through most of that stressed syllable, and then it would rise afterwards. So that it's an issue of timing, and it's a really subtle one. It's easy to confuse them, but this is a low plus high star because that rise is right on that stressed syllable. And we see the same pattern with illuminating. So here's our first 2 syllables of illuminating, or maybe the second syllable alone. But you can see that rise again for illuminating. And the only difference from what we saw before is that it's a little bit lower in terms of its F0. So we have a low plus downstepped high star here. So
that's really illuminating. That's really illuminating.
It's kind of like she's losing enthusiasm as she goes through the utterance, right? So this one's not as prominent as the one before it.
Really?
Really. And maybe this sounds a little bit sarcastic to you. I don't know.
That's really illuminating.
Yeah. Okay. So message received. Hopefully my words are still helping you at all in some fashion. But I'll move on from the people who don't care about that one anymore and say that's all you need to worry about for illuminating number 3. We have 2 Marianas as well. Yeah, the wallflowers had 3 Marlenas. We've got 2 Marianas, or maybe 5 and 6. I don't know. Either way, let's just focus on the intonation here. The first thing I'm going to focus on is changing the pitch range. So I'm going to move it down to 75 on the low end, and we still don't see what's going on here at the end. So we'll listen to this one.
Mariana made the marmalade. Mariana made the marmalade.
And you can see there's a whole bunch of creak here at the tail end of this utterance.
Made the marmalade.
So we know she's at the low end of her pitch range there. I might go even lower, see if we can get a pitch contour with 50. No, not really. What happens if we go all the way down to 20? Anything? No, it just gets weird. All right, so let's keep it at 75 and recognize that she's at the very low end of her pitch range.
Mariana made the marmalade.
After this last pitch, or after this pitch accent here on Mariana. Yeah, I'm totally fine with all the word breaks here. In the break indices, we know this is a low at the tail end because she's very low.
Mariana made the marmalade.
And it's a question of what's going on with these pitch accents as usual. So let's focus on this one. We can see there's obviously a rise here on the first word, Mariana.
Mariana. Mariana. Mariana.
And the question again is, how does that relate in terms of timing to the stressed syllable in Mariana, which is the third syllable? So there's kind of a secondary stress on Mariana, or in this case, it's going to wind up sounding secondary on the first syllable, like Mariana. Mariana, like that stress pattern. The third syllable also has a stress on it and also has this pitch accent, which is going to make it sound more prominent than it would otherwise. So if we can focus on that a little bit, again, we can see the rise kind of going all the way through it and actually peaking right before we get to that N. So timing-wise, that makes this a low plus high star, which this person has transcribed correctly, which is nice. And then there's a question of what to do with everything that comes after it.
Mariana made the marmalade. Mariana made the marmalade.
Make that maybe a little bit louder if I can.
Mariana made the marmalade. Mariana made the marmalade.
So this person has a low star on marmalade, and it's in the right spot for a pitch accent on marmalade, which is the first syllable, the stress syllable on marmalade. Yeah, it's a question of whether it's there or not.
Mariana made the marmalade.
And I think I've said this before, but when you have low stars, they're just generally not going to sound as prominent as high star or low plus high star pitch accents because, you know, that lower F0 is going to just generally sound less prominent in terms of just how you process the acoustics of it. You know, you kind of have to put less effort into articulating it or pushing air out of your lungs to make it, and it doesn't, you know, rise up as high in pitch prominence as well. So maybe there's a low star there, maybe there's not.
Mariana made the marmalade.
You can hear there's a little bit of stress, but it doesn't sound super prominent. And the reason that I, in my feedback to you on this exercise, did not transcribe a low star there,
made the marmalade.
What kind of had to do with this creak. You can tell that right after this L plus high star, she descends to the bottom end of her pitch range, and she just kind of stays there in creak throughout the whole thing.
Mariana made the marmalade.
As if she doesn't really care about the rest of the utterance almost. So she's not putting a whole lot of effort into any of that. You could still get pitch accents in creak, but I don't hear it. I hear it as her just descending to the bottom of her range and staying there, which is in effect you can get on the intonation contour, the pitch contour, just through this L phrase accent at the beginning of this boundary tone combo. So it's supposed to fill in that gap between the last pitch accent and the boundary tone at the tail end, and I think that's what it's doing.
Mariana made the marmalade.
And I think what's going on with the first syllable of marmalade is just stressed, but it's still staying at the low end of the pitch range. So that's, I'm going to leave that one at that, and hopefully that makes sense. And if it doesn't, maybe Mariana number 6 will help clarify things even further. We'll find out. So this is also the same speaker.
Mariana made the marmalade. Mariana made the marmalade. Mariana made the marmalade.
And there's some things I like about this transcription and others I don't. So one of the things I don't like about it is that it's missing all the break indices, which, yeah, they're not, they haven't been super controversial yet, but you can't forget them to make this a complete TOBI transcription. So I'm going to transcribe them relatively uncontroversially, which you can do too. But we've got a 1 here at the end of Mariana.
Mariana made.
And 1 at the end of made. 1 at the end of the. And then 4 at the end of marmalade.
Marmalade.
And I'm going to move this one over a little bit because that the goes by really quickly, just to kind of time it a little bit better. But hopefully you can see in this spectrogram there's a tiny little fricative for the interdental, and then there's a tiny little schwa right here. And then we go to marmalade.
Marmalade.
Yeah, so
Made.
you could, like, if you hear some sort of like clear co-articulation between the "the" at the end of made and the at the beginning of then you could transcribe a 0 here. Nothing super obvious is jumping out though.
Mariana made the marmalade.
So we'll just leave it as it is. There's a low boundary tone combo at the end here.
Mariana made the marmalade.
You can hear she's going down to the bottom end of her range as usual. And it's a question of what's going on with these two pitch accents. So I kind of like this H plus downstepped high star. That's kind of a cool idea here.
Mariana made the marmalade. Mariana made the marmalade.
I'm going to leave that for the time being and just say, let's focus on Mariana.
Mariana.
And this is an interesting transcription as well, this low star plus high. So there's, as we said before, there are two stressed syllables in Mariana, the first syllable and the third syllable, first and third. If you're going to get a pitch accent, it's going to be on either one of those syllables. So it's a question, if we listen to Mariana, like which syllable sounds more prominent in this particular case?
Mariana.
And I don't know if you're getting the same percept as I do, but what I hear is more of that rise on the third syllable than I hear a low on the first syllable. And I've said this before, ideally, like with a low star, you'd expect some sort of like bottoming out, like a little trough in the pitch accent contour or the pitch contour. It doesn't have to be there, of course, but it should sound more prominent to you at least. So again, you can close your eyes.
Mariana.
And I still hear something more prominent on that third syllable, that rise onto and she's just kind of like going through the motions to get there sort of with the first two syllables.
Mariana.
It's not a steep rise though, which is where it can get kind of confusing. So it's not like a low plus high star, it's just kind of a gradual rise. And that's another reason why I wouldn't argue for a low star plus high, is because you want to see a more dramatic rise for those bitonal pitch accents, even after a low star contour. Or low star, part of a low star plus high pitch accent. So for that reason, I'm going to leave this as a high star here.
Mariana made the marmalade.
This, because of that's high, leading into this accent on marmalade.
Mariana marmalade.
Which hopefully you hear as well. It fits the sort of high plus downstepped high star pattern, but you don't need sort of that extra complication of the high plus downstepped high star at the beginning of that. You can just say it's a downstepped high star.
Mariana made the marmalade.
Mariana made the marmalade. But if you just played it like this, like if this were the beginning of the utterance,
made the marmalade.
Then yeah, that would be a high plus downstepped high star. That would work.
Made the marmalade.
Because nothing here is accented in the same way as Mariana.
Made the marmalade.
So interesting idea there, and I'm glad you threw it out there. It helps kind of clarify the difference between these various subtle distinctions between like high plus downstepped high star and just downstepped high star. But that's what we have here.
Mariana made the marmalade.
Just a downstepped high. And that's all I'm going to say for this half of the exercise. I'll come back again in a minute and we'll do the next 4. See you then.